Welcome to the League with your host, David Magid, and I am Benoy Thanjan. You might know me from the Solar Maverick podcast. It is February 13th, 2026. You give us 5 minutes, we give you the latest clean energy trends. You've heard me talk about this a lot on the League. The Foreign Entity of Concern guidance actually was released yesterday. Treasury released it. If you're not familiar, it's called FEOC, Foreign Entity of Concern. It really focuses on China. And basically, this was something that President Trump signed an executive order on July 6th, and we're supposed to get guidance 30 to 45 days. And this applies for basically clean energy projects for 2026. As I said, it was supposed to be released 30 to 45 days after the initial executive order, which would have been August or September. It's now February 12th when it was released. But I think the whole industry is excited that there is guidance related to this. What we were seeing was a lot of consultants and law firms basically providing what they think the guidance is. Basically, it determines eligibility for clean energy tax credits under the IRA, which was the Inflation Reduction Act. It focuses on basically ownership control and supply chain sourcing, specifically from China. Basically, projects may lose control if prohibited foreign entities is concerned, have significant ownership or influence. Also, projects can be disqualified if key components or inputs come from FEOC beyond set thresholds. This compliance becomes central to basically tax credit eligibility and project finance. Supply chain transparency is now a financing requirement. Tax equity, credit buyers, investors will have to scrutinize sourcing and ownership. What it'll do is increase demand for domestic manufacturing and US suppliers. Um, Basically, developers have to reassess vendor relationships and procurement strategies. There could be project delays based on these compliant documentation increases. I think, the bottom line, FIAC adds complexity, but it also, what the industry needs is um, basically guidance on what to do. And now, hopefully, this creates some certainty. This is not the final guidance. This is the initial guidance. And over the next few months, uh, the Treasury will finalize exactly what the FEOC is. But this is what, is the most information that's out there right now. I think the issue, which David and I were talking about, is it's going to take time for the US supply chain to have all these components or these Chinese companies to basically move to like instead of a majority owner to a minority owner, even with solar being around for a while. And right now, too, mostly battery storage is materially from China. So I think there's gonna be like basically a time frame where it's gonna take basically the industry to adjust, and these FIAC guidance applies starting for projects January 1st of 2026. As obviously the news just came out last night, we're going to have a lot more information as, time goes on. Everyone's still analyzing the Treasury fiat guidance that was released yesterday. And that's that.
Benoy, so great to hear. I know we've been talking about FEOC for a moment now, so I'm glad we finally got something from Treasury, right?
Yeah, definitely. I know you were talking about maybe we won't get guidance, but I think it's great that we have guidance. It's earlier in the year, and then the industry, as you know, is innovative and will adjust to the new scenario. But things take time in business. It can't happen instantaneously.
Exactly, especially in our industry. Uh,
Definitely.
so going into topic that I'm going to be discussing today is really an index of the New York State interconnection queue. We're going to be talking about the NISO interconnection queue in the wholesale market. We're going to be speaking about each DG market. So we're going to be talking about the load serving entities, the Con Eds, Central Hudson's, ONRs of the world. So let's start in the NISO market. NISO market There was a change, that we spoke about actually last year or 2024 now. It's the cluster study process for interconnection generation. So we're going to break up the NISO interconnection queue by load interconnection. And whereas where I'm going to start now, load interconnection. In the last year, there's been over a gigawatt of load interconnection applications that have been submitted into the interconnection queue. These load interconnection applications, it's a very similar process to the way that interconnection previously was done for generation prior to cluster. Costs somewhere around the neighborhood of $250,000. Deposits, fees, process is somewhat lengthy. Nothing like PJM of what you're hearing there. The applications for load, which are not going to surprise you, we are seeing data centers popping up, at least applications for them. Advanced manufacturing is really what New York State is more known for when it comes to the load profile. These are these fab facilities, that are, taking place within the Mohawk, region of New York State. Topic on these load, again, these are load interconnection applications. These are not final approvals. They're still speculative. So just because we set a gigawatt plus of load in the last year does not mean they're going to get built. On that topic, New York State is also talking about a moratorium on permitting for data centers. So we'll see where that goes. We'll see what occurs here. Very interesting. Now, moving out of the load interconnection, we're going to go into the cluster study. Cluster study, we're on the 2024 cluster study. The next cluster study window is actually going to be opening, in the coming months, around May. This cluster study is not complete. So the applications submitted in 2024 are going to be completed around that May period, right before the start of the next study. The applications that are in there are still lots of solar projects that are going through the process, lots of battery storage projects. There's even wind projects that are still there. Although we've heard all these headlines of offshore winds, there is still offshore wind applications within the queue. I'm sure these folks understand the long horizon times with this and do want to maintain their queue positions rather than just withdrawing, to current federal pressure in the administration. That being said, we did see a dramatic amount of drop-offs and withdrawals. Right now, for energy storage, which we'll talk about it on some of the other queues, the biggest proponent is the moratoriums and permitting. Permitting is a major issue in the state of New York for battery storage. Multiple fires have occurred due to various different reasons of whether it's older technology or different components that have put a really nasty black eye on the industry. There's been a lot of hard work from the industry, to tackle this with working groups, and we really have the most stringent and most safe, regulations in place. That being said, does not help the fact that we have lots of misinformation out there, and permitting is going to be very challenging. Where that translates into the interconnection queue is we are expecting lots and lots of these projects to withdraw. It costs a lot of money, millions of dollars, multi-millions of dollars to maintain these queue positions. Developers, sponsors are not going to take that risk holding on to those queue positions when there's no permits in sight, for lengthy durations of time. Seeing a lot of withdrawals. This is going on everywhere in the entire state of New York right now. Very few towns that it's not. Now we're going to step down a little bit onto the DG markets. We're going to start with Central Hudson Gas and Electric, the smallest utility, in the state of New York. That utility, if you're looking at the queue, not too much activity that's going on, within there. It's been very flat. The economics have been traditionally pretty challenging there. Not a lot of circuitry to find good interconnection. Permitting is also very challenging. So fairly flat, market over there. You're not seeing too much growth within the Central Hudson gas and electric market. Very few players, just a handful, maybe 5 or 8 players, that are working there. Not a big aggregate of projects. Now we're going to move over to NYSEG RG&E, where you're seeing a similar type of play there. More activity because it's got a larger, diverse market. You're still seeing applications coming in. NYSEG RG&E does have some more capacity looking at that. So that's why you're seeing some more demand. You are still seeing a lot of these community solar projects that are funneling through, still going through the timeline of interconnection, Caesar studies, it is slowing down of the applications with additional worries, as Benoy had mentioned, regarding FEOC, safe harboring with the ITC cliff that is dropping off. Now I'm going to jump to PSEG in Long Island. PSEG in Long Island actually does have a pleasant amount of battery energy storage that is in the queue has gone through these impact studies. Lots of solar. I was pretty surprised to see all the solar projects that are there. Other piece of information that dropped and was introduced, especially to a lot of the folks in the Nicaea market by our friend Noah, who had informed us all regarding this amazing increase that's expected through the tariffs under VETR for these VETR projects, expecting somewhere in the neighborhood of a 30% increase, which is definitely huge, and we'll start to see a lot of activity. Suffolk County has even put a RFI out looking at demand for more solar within the market. We'll be interested to see where that goes. Energy storage will also be very interesting there. There's still a lot of quirks to be worked out. Right now, energy storage in Long Island, there is no charging tariff set up. So there's not a really great opportunity. It appears to be evolving. So keep close eyes on PSC&G Long Island. They have always been pretty proactive and leaders in the state of New York. Next, we're going to go to Orange and Rockland and O&R market. We are actually seeing a lot of energy storage projects. I was actually pretty surprised, the quantity of standalone battery energy storage projects. You're seeing a pivot from a lot of community solar developers that are now really pushing hard on battery storage. My biggest concern with O&R is there's lots of moratoriums from large scale projects. These 5 megawatt sites that they're aggregating are going to look identical to 100 plus megawatt projects from the municipality standpoint and the feedback. Be careful out there, but there is a lot of projects in the queue. Let's see where those materialize. Still a decent amount of community solar projects in O&R. Economics are not that great, to be quite frank with you. When you look at the VETR tariff in O&R and the cost of lands, you don't really get a good thresholds. And also there is a lot of clusters of high interconnection costs going on at O&R. Next, we're going to talk about National Grid. National Grid is pretty obvious to everyone here that this is the largest market within New York State, largest territory. The queue is huge. You do have a few stragglers, there's maybe a dozen developers who have 1 or 2 projects, floating around, within the market, community solar projects, maybe a battery storage project or 2. National Grid is really dominated by a few players who have 70, 90 plus megawatts of community solar projects in that market that are moving forward under development. Lots of the projects are very mature, so that National Grid queue is very fluid right now. Another big shock to me was the quantity of projects, battery energy storage projects, standalone battery projects, 5 megawatt projects in National Grid. I was shocked to see how many there were. Lots, within the Niagara Falls region, Zone A, and there is a good threshold. I do not know if the economics make sense. I'd love to see the numbers and see how that plays out. Let's see if these projects actually come to fruition. I'm very skeptical about National Grid O&R when it comes to a permitting standpoint for battery storage in the short term. Long term, I think there's tons of value, but I think we're going to definitely see some headwinds there. Next topic that we have in the market is Con Edison. Con Edison has obviously the highest demands, largest load in the entire state of New York. When you're looking at Con Edison, I was really happy to see the amount of large projects, 1 megawatt projects plus, that are actually taking place. This is the most I've ever seen in the market right now. Lots of rooftop, even some ground mount projects that appear to be taking place, within Staten Island. So really, fascinating to see the market evolve. Probably one of the big reasons for that is the NYSERDA megawatt block, has a pretty generous incentive, towards these 1 megawatt projects plus, in the neighborhood of 40 cents a watt plus. And next really interesting observation within Con Ed is standalone energy storage. And in case you've been living under a rock, these energy storage projects in Con Ed, have really becoming very interesting play. This got started out years back by the nice folks at 9 Energy, who really created a great system, Convergent, maybe a few other players, the New Leafs of the world, and it really took off. There is over a gigawatt of battery energy storage projects that are just aggregates of 5 megawatt projects, huge quantities, people co-locating projects. It's to the point where the market is saturated. Con Edison, literally, if you look at their maps, there is not many places to site battery storage at all. It actually reminds me of how National Grid looked, a couple of years ago when the market was flooding. So that market is pretty saturated now. Interesting part about Con Ed in New York City is it's probably one of the easier places to get a permit because at least there's a process. Doesn't mean it's easy going to be quick, but at least there's a fluid process and a structure compared to National Grid and other markets where you're dealing with tons of different municipalities. So that's that. That's the New York interconnection market and a really nice snapshot. We're going to have some data points. You can visually understand what I'm seeing, see the names of the players, understand what type of business opportunities exist. You just enjoyed 5 minutes of the absolute best information in the clean tech sector. Make sure you hit like, subscribe, and God bless.